Hey, it's Coach Anderson here again from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. Today we're going to look at Unit 10, World War II, Part 1. We're going to take World War II since it's such a huge and broad topic. We're going to take it and divide it into two parts. We're going to talk primarily today about the dictators and how we got into this conflict, and then talk about the United States of America in terms of how resistance or our reluctance to get involved. And then next week, we'll look at World War II Part 2, and we'll talk about some of the actual events, of course, that happened in the war. But today what we're going to do is look at World War II Part 1, 1931 and 1941. Our first lesson in Unit 10 will be Dictators in Europe and Asia. We're going to be talking about some fascist or Nazi dictators, of course, and they're going to be what most people, a lot of people in America look at as, of course, as being a little bit of a threat to the United States of America. And we're going to talk about those people and try to give you some background in terms of what the feeling, of course, around the world was about this, start of authoritarianism in Europe and Asia. What we're going to do is we have two unit focus questions. The first unit focus question is going to primarily focus on Part 1, and it says, why did efforts to prevent World War II fail? And then the second question says, how did the home front effort bolster American success in World War II? So we're going to be looking at two unit focus questions. The first one, as we said, will be concentrated more in Part 1. And then, of course, the second question will be in Part 2. What we're going to do, of course, is look at our vocabulary. The vocabulary, academic vocabulary, is extol, embolden, garner, and then some of the content vocabulary over here, things that you may not have heard of before, like gulag, like Mein Kampf, black shirts. We'll try to delve into those terms a little bit and give you some explanation where it comes up, of course, in the content in the lesson. But what we want you to do, of course, as we always tell you to do, of course, is take out a journal, go ahead and write these terms down, and go ahead and define them yourself. There's a whole lot more learning that takes place when you go and do things like that for yourself than me telling you, of course, what they are. What we're going to do, of course, is look at the lesson focus question. The lesson focus question is what's going to guide us through this first lesson and try to give us an idea about what it is, the main idea of this particular lesson, or what it is that we're trying to get over to you. The lesson focus question for lesson 1 is what conditions in Europe and Asia contribute to the rise of dictators and authoritarianism. So this is where we'll begin with the do now activity. Take out your journal and then write down the statement that you see here and then respond. The journal topic for today says briefly describe what Europe was like politically and economically in the years following World War I. How might these conditions have contributed to the rise of authoritarian leaders? So at this time, go ahead and take a few minutes and write down the topic, of course, and respond to that particular prompt. And we'll come back in a few moments and see what conclusions you drew. Well, you should have had enough time that you were able to go through, of course, and look at those particular, this particular statement, of course, and then try to formulate your own opinion about what do you think, of course, happened here. But it says basically, how might the conditions after World War I contribute to the rise of authoritarian leaders? Well, the answer to that, in my mind, is kind of simple. You have to look at Europe after World War I. After World War I, of course, the Germans, of course, are defeated. And because the Germans are defeated, the whole map of Europe, of course, is going to change. Everybody's trying to determine what type of government, of course, that they're going to turn to. And what it does is because of the disenchantment and all the problems, of course, that happen, people are looking for something to galvanize them or to unify them. And in some cases, it was about finding leaders, of course, that were telling people, of course, what it is that they thought that they could do, of course, to improve their situation. And when you look at people that will emerge like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini and Francisco Franco in Spain, what they're going to do is they're going to appeal to people from the standpoint of, it's not your fault that you're suffering the way that you're suffering. It's somebody else's fault. And what we want you to do, of course, is to get behind our leadership, and we're going to make those people pay. And so because of that kind of galvanizing talk, with these authoritarian leaders, people are going to fall behind because nobody wants to ever say something's happened because of something I did. It's always easier to find a scapegoat. And that's what happens in a simplistic form. That's what happens, of course, in post-World War I Europe. And then the economic situation was awful, and we'll get to more of that, but your answer should have been along those lines. All right, we're going to start with the first topic of talking about authoritarian dictators in terms of who they were and where they were. Well, the first, Benito Mussolini, was the leader of fascism in Italy, and by 1922 had consolidated his power as a deterrent to communism. Now you have to understand that the Russian Revolution, or the Bolshevik Revolution, had just happened in Russia, and people throughout the world were afraid that communism, of course, was going to take over. Here, even here in the United States of America, when we were going through the first Red Scare. With the support of the black shirts or the militia, Mussolini was declared Il Duce, or the leader of Italy. Adolf Hitler is the second dictator that we'll talk about, and he is going to emerge as the leader of Nazi Germany, or the National Socialist Party. And he wrote a book called Mein Kampf while he was in jail. And what he basically did in this particular book is he extolled the superiority of the German race. And once again, he told them how great they were, and how the problems, of course, that they were having weren't problems that they created. There were problems, of course, that were visited upon them from outside forces. And one of the central tenets of his philosophy was anti-Semitism. In other words, what he did, of course, is he blamed the Jews, or he scapegoated the Jews, of course, as being some of the cause of Germany's, of course, ills. And now, in 1934, Hitler becomes Der Führer, or the leader of Germany. On the left, you have a picture of Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, and on the right, you have a picture of Adolf Hitler, two of the most recognizable people, of course, in modern history. Hitler, of course, is the leader of Nazi Germany. And if you'll notice, of course, in looking at it, they're both in military garb. So one of the things that we can talk to you about these dictators is that in most cases, well, in just about all cases, they had the support of the military. And in this particular case, they were the leaders of the military. Authoritarian dictators that you may not have heard of as much. Well, Stalin probably is very familiar to you. Joseph Stalin replaced Lenin as the leader of the Union of Soviet Social Republic, which was the name Russia adopted after the Russian Revolution, or the Bolshevik Revolution. Stalin started the collectivization of Russian farms and businesses. And now what that simply means was he took over the farms and businesses throughout Russia, and he basically, gave the government control of them. And in essence, what happens in communism in the Soviet Union is that the people that live there work for the government. They work for the government, they live on the government's farms, they live in the government housing. The government owns all the means of production and all the things that you and I may not think about so much in terms of the homes that we live in. The government owned all of that, and the people owed their existence, of course, to the government. The only thing about that, not everybody, of course, was about giving away all their businesses or giving away their their homes. And what happens is anybody that opposed Stalin, he would take them, of course, either they would come up missing or they would find their way to a gulag or some of the Russian prisons in places like Siberia, where in most cases they didn't return. At some point, we have estimated that Stalin was responsible for the death of 20 million of his own people through this collectivization effort. Hideki Tojo became the minister of Japan in 1941 after garnering popular support because of his aggressive approach to the spread of Japanese influence throughout East Asia. He's going to be responsible for taking over parts of China, going to be responsible for taking over parts of Vietnam or Indochina. So we're going to be looking at a very aggressive nature, once again, by people like Tojo. Now, Tojo, of course, wasn't the true leader of Japan. He basically was the general for the emperor, who was Emperor Hirohito. Now, so when you look at these authoritarian dictators, one of the things that we showed you that they all had in common, of course, is that they were all basically the leaders of the military, and they used the military, of course, to further their agenda. On the left, you have Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union, and on the right, you have Hideki Tojo from Japan. The road to appeasement. Now, before all of this fighting and stuff took over or happened in Europe, we have to understand that there was a slow boil to this. It was a simmer. It started with a simmer. Just like when you take something, of course, and put it on the stove, of course, with water, and you start to boil it. Before it boils, of course, it simmers. And what we're going to look at in this particular case with World War II, there's a lot of things under the surface that are kind of simmering. The anti-Semitism in Germany, for instance, is one of those things that's kind of simmering. Now, the thing is this here, everybody, even people in the United States of America, understood what was happening in Europe, and they were bothered by it, but at the same time, Americans were really reluctant, of course, to go overseas, of course, and get involved in somebody else's business. But we did recognize, of course, what was happening. And what was happening was people like Hitler. Hitler was going through, and he was talking about this idea of Anschluss. And what Anschluss simply meant was he wanted all German-speaking people, of course, to be under a German nation, which meant that he would have to take over parts of the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, Danzig in Poland, and even Austria. Now, it's interesting to understand something about Hitler. He's doing all these things, of course, in the name of the fatherland of Germany, but he's not even German. He's Austrian. So in looking at it, this whole idea with Hitler started as kind of a simmer, and then it's kind of building up, and it's going to eventually lead, of course, to him invading Poland and invading these other places, and uniting them under the banner of Germany. Now, what could have happened, though, if you look at Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and the French, if they had probably stepped up to Hitler a little bit earlier and stood up to him a little bit earlier, maybe we could have avoided fighting this war when we started fighting it, of course, in 1939. So, but what they did, of course, is they allowed Hitler, of course, to take over the places that he wanted to take over, and they basically appeased him and said, okay, you can have this, but don't do this. And when Hitler saw them make that kind of deal with him, he understood that they weren't as confident about defeating Germany, and he understood that he had done enough to build the German military that he could accomplish his goals and not in Europe and not worry about the French or the British. Going right back, further emboldened, of course, by this idea of appeasement. After taking over the Sudetenland, Hitler does move into Poland, and on September 1st, 1939, after Hitler invaded Poland, World War II begins. Here's a picture of Neville Chamberlain. His appeasement of Hitler was a sign of weakness that convinced Hitler to continue German aggression. So now we have war. So World War II begins. By October 5th, 1940, the Germans had defeated Poland using the German Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. And starting in May 1940, the Germans invaded France through Belgium, and by June 1940, after the British and French evacuation at Dunkirk, the Germans had control of France, and now the only thing they had to do, of course, is concentrate on trying to invade Great Britain. Though they were defeated, the French still were fighting through the resistance led by General Charles de Gaulle, who after the end of the war, of course, will become very big in French politics. The defeat of the French led to Hitler's bombing of Great Britain and a possible German invasion, which never materialized. Hitler, the good thing about Great Britain is their geography. There's an island country, of course, off of the coast of Europe, and it was difficult, of course, to mount a ground invasion by the Germans because they would have to land, equipment, land troops, of course, on the British coast, and then, of course, invade that way. So because of their geography, it makes it a little bit more difficult for the Germans to invade Great Britain, but they do bomb the stew out of it through something called the Battle of Britain, where we're going to find that Britain is going to be reduced, cities like London and Britain are going to be reduced to rubble. Here's a picture of the German Blitzkrieg, and what the Blitzkrieg means is lightning war. And the reason why they call it lightning war is because the German troop movements were so quick. Because of the mobilized vehicles that they use and the tanks that they use, and because they were so fast and the good road system that they had in Germany, they were able to move to different places so quickly. Here's a picture of Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the Free French Resistance, after the fall of the French to the Germans. Now, what that does, of course, is it takes us to the end of lesson 1, and what we want you to do is take the ideas that we talked about with these dictators, and we gave you a little bit of a worksheet. We're going to give you about 15 minutes, of course, to go through and look at this worksheet, and what it basically does is ask you to complete the activities and answer the question below. It says use your textbook or any additional resources provided by your teacher, and what we want you to basically do is to look at these concepts and terms and match these concepts and terms, of course, with each other. Now, we won't go over these with you. What you can do, of course, is we have the reference slide at the end of the unit. You can go through, and your teacher, of course, can go over these with you and give you an idea about what some of the correct answers would be. But to help out a little bit, I guess I could do one for you. In terms of looking at, say, a dictator. Dictator is a political leader who has absolute power and typically rules in a dictatorial manner. So 4 out of 5. I gave you 1 out of the 5, so you don't have 4 left, of course, to do. The rise of dictators are the concepts, and when we're talking about this particular lesson, these are the terms that we want you to concentrate the most on: fascism, dictator, communism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism. And the underlying theme for these concepts is that citizens are second to the government and exist to serve the will of the government, unlike democracy in America, where the government exists to serve the will of the people. And that's the biggest difference between us and them. Here's the second worksheet that we want you to work on. And once again, it's a comparative analysis. What we want you to do, of course, is to look at each one of the leaders that we gave you based on the information that we've given you and what you can find yourself. Identify the country that each one of these men, of course, belong to, their key policy, their method of control, and their impact on society. Once again, we won't go over it, but we do have the reference slide at the end with all the answers, and you can answer this, submit it to your teacher, of course, for a grade. All right, that gets us to the lesson focus question. What conditions in Europe and Asia contribute to the rise of dictators and authoritarianism? Well, it shouldn't be that difficult. First, we talk about the economic issue. So there were several things, of course, that led to it, but the biggest and most important thing is in terms of looking at bad feelings. Germany felt like that they were mistreated, of course, after World War I, and they were to some degree, especially by the French, of course, and in their mind, the French and the British. So bad feelings, old grudges, economic hardships, and nationalism allowed dictators to rise to power in Europe and Asia. Dictators offered scapegoats as solutions to national problems, and dictators were able to unite people under the belief that others were the source of their problems. So because of those types of things, we're going to find that it sets the stage for what happens, of course, in World War II. Once again, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I'm here to tell you, this is U.S. history, which means it's your history, and you should do your own research and reach your own conclusions. And with that, we'll see you next time.